Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening from. Welcome to the Change Management Simplified podcast, where we will explain and discuss what change management is really about, using real examples alongside principles of change management based on our experiences on projects, transformations, change initiatives, and of course, the home experiences as well. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Change Management Simplified podcast. And yet again, I don't get tired of saying thank you for coming back to listen. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for following. But I'd like you to add maybe some more comments. If you like, just add a comment, please. Or continue to send through your questions as well. Today, as you see, or as you're listening to me, the question that I have in front of me is how do I achieve successful or effective change management? And I'm a bit of a weird one, and weird but great weirdness. And this is really because I have different skill sets, from transformation, process improvement, change management, and project management. So I tend to use my skill sets, all those different skill sets, to really actually perform all the different roles that I might be working on. And it's been beneficial to me for me to do this, to do so. Now, I bet you're thinking, how crazy can you be to do what you're doing? Well, it works for me, and I'm going to share my experiences with the real example, and hopefully you actually understand why I do what I do and in a way that I do it. Now, how do I achieve effective change management? Simplistically, I combine Lean Six Sigma principles plus PROSCI ADKAR models. And to me, this gives me the breadth of the knowledge, the input that I need for me to be able to put in place a strategy or react to any change resistance ultimately that might arise or during the transformation. However, I'll take you back a step. But before I actually do that, what are we going to do? First and foremost, I would like to give credit to an individual by the names of Craig Hoggart, who actually introduced me to Lean Six Sigma several years ago in my early career days. And since then, Craig, you'll be pleased to hear that I've continuously applied Six Sigma up to this date. And this is why I do what I'm doing and I achieve successful results. So kudos to you, hats off to you. Please tag Craig Hoggart if you know him, but I'll also tag him as well just to say thank you. Now, in today's discussion, what are we going to do? Um, First, I'll explain how I achieve effective change management with Lean Six Sigma and PROSCI ADKAR combined. And then also I will give an example of how I do this. And then thirdly, I'll also summarize the outcomes for the change initiative by combining the two approaches, which is Lean Six Sigma and PROSCI ADKAR. And on that note, let's begin. So how do I achieve effective change management? As I said before, just I simply combine Lean Six Sigma principles plus the PROSCI ADKAR model approach. These two approaches, as you will see, Lean Six Sigma is an approach that is referred to as a process improvement method or an improvement engine, and because it establishes new roles and procedures, and when you introduce new roles or establish new roles and procedures, you will result in having to identify a new RACI. I've mentioned what the RACI acronym is, but just in case you've forgotten, that's being responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So those two components of the RACI have to be fulfilled by the impacted stakeholders. To do this terminology or reference justice, I actually referenced the what is Lean Six Sigma um, small book, which is very nice, very short, and very precise, written by Mike George, Dave Rollin, and Bill Kersel. Um, Please have a listen. Oh, not a listen. I think they might have an audio now, but I've always had the book for several years that I was referred to. Very easy for you to help you understand what really Lean Six Sigma is about and the different components that I'd end up using. So that's Lean Six Sigma. Now, secondly, the ADKAR, PROSCI ADKAR model. Now, you've also heard me mention this, but not in detail. But I do apply it a lot in all the projects or the roles that I perform, especially from a change management focused perspective. It's an approach or a framework for understanding and managing individual change. It provides tangible guidance and structure for leaders. Did you hear that? For leaders who want to motivate change in others. Now, as I've mentioned before in the emotional intelligence episodes, which were episode 5 to 10, I always say leaders come in different forms. As a parent, you're a leader. As an older sibling, you're a leader. An auntie and uncle, you're a leader because you've got all these different young people or those who follow you based on your experience and will follow your guidance. And then, of course, we've got leaders at work. You're a supervisor, you're a team leader, you're a CFO, you're a CEO, a COO, a functional lead or head of department. You're all leaders. So this terminology covers or the elements of the PROSCI article caters for such individuals for you to be able to be fully equipped to be able to navigate the change and take the others with you on this journey to try and make sure that it's implemented successfully. Okay, so what are the key features of Lean Six Sigma? It's data and fact based, and therefore it makes any decision or anyone you're presenting decisions, presenting results to, they should be making decisions based on your findings, and that's important. Um, it's a how it comes about, or these principles that are within Lean Six Sigma come about by combining Lean approach methodologies from the manufacturing world. Toyota is a classic case, as well as Ford. They've all ended up, applying either Lean or Lean Six Sigma in full, and and also applying Sigma methodologies or Sigma methods. So it takes the best out of both worlds. One being the fact that it's data and fact based. Teamwork is key to this process or to this approach. Individuals have to work together, share knowledge. People should feel free to be able to share and discuss because that's an environment where you will get people to become more creative and naturally and be able to solutionize and come up with the best approaches for actually doing, the process or performing the process as and when required. It's the other thing you have to aim for is to delight your customers. You always have to have that as your vision, as your end goal. You're not doing it to reduce cost. Your end goal should be, how do I please my customer? And then in between, working backwards to get to that pleasing your customer and making them delightful is, how do you then make the process efficient and then ultimately making it cheaper to conduct, and therefore both the company and the company being happy, the company and the customer being happy with the results. And therefore quality and speed is key, or both key components to Lean Six Sigma. And as you're going through this, because you start from beginning to the end, it's not based on assumptions, it's not based on hearsay or, I heard this is how things are done. No. Whoever is involved in the process documentation or trying to understand the as is process has to take it from beginning to the end. And how they do this, using one of the I'll say the approaches or the models. I'm going to use the SIPOC model, which is SIPOC diagram. You take it back to the very beginning. You identify your suppliers. Who are the individuals who are involved in what needs to be done? You know, What do they provide? How do they provide it? Then the inputs, the information and material provided. If we just bring it back to the actuarial world, they provide discounting factors and several other elements that feed into the cash flow process. I'm using this because my example is going to be based on the cash flow process. Then for P, it's process, and these are the steps that are used to do the work. So this is where you go back and map out the process from beginning to the end, because if you're going to propose any new changes or improvements to a process based on Lean Six Sigma methodology, you have to base it on the facts, which means the as is, as it's performed, and then identify the gaps, the inconsistencies, and then propose the better way or the improved way of actually carrying out this process in a better or much a higher quality of a standard, plus the speed, increasing the speed at which this process is conducted. Outputs. Outputs, that's the O, and that's really the product or the service or information being sent to the customers. And then customers, or the C standing for customers, that is really the next step or final step in the process. Using the cash flow process as an example, at the end of it, the finance team are the recipients of the end product of the cash flow process, because that feeds into their valuation of the calculations, which then produce the final financial statements and then the reports or disclosures, and therefore them being the end users and the recipients of the information. So that's Lean Six Sigma. Now, if we go back to PROSCI, as I said, PROSCI is a framework that really helps you understand the change, where the gaps are, for you to be able to entice or motivate others to come on this change with you. The common feature that you will find with this is also people-centric, impacted stakeholders. If we use a manufacturing or product output, it will be the customers. So this is the common thing between these two methodologies, and this is why I use it a lot. It will help you also identify any gaps in the change management process. Now, when you define the change management strategy and you're going through the ADKAR model, which is A for awareness, B is desire, K is knowledge, providing the knowledge where required to the new processes and why. The ability, A is for ability, providing the tools, the systems, the processes that these individuals have to now use in the new environment. So how do you get them involved? Through UATs, through end user testing or user acceptance testing? That is critical and that is important. Unfortunately, we tend to fail foul on projects when it comes to that, because we never allow enough time or enough involvement for the impacted teams to do that. We suffer the consequences of that as we try to transition. And then R is reinforcement, which is basically documenting lessons learned, making sure that you're continuously improving the process, as you here have said, continuously improving the process, and then of course 360 feedback on what else can we improve going forward. Now, when you look at both these two approaches, as I've spoken through them, is one, they're both based on people centric. They care about the quality that the customer or the end user gets. And when I come to define a strategy, for example, for the knowledge aspect side of it, or for me to raise awareness or desire, I will leverage the findings from the process, from the SIPOC methodology findings that the process team would have performed or I would have performed. One, it would have identified all the different stakeholders that I need to ensure are fully aware of the change, why the change, and how it impacts them and how they can get involved. Secondly, I will also leverage the findings within the process to identify what type of training that we'll need to ensure we put in place or conduct for these individuals to be able to get familiar and get the experience on the process, on the tool before we go live, to get them a bit more comfortable. And then, of course, the reinforcement strategies as I identify those, stakeholders involved in those five components within the SIPOC diagram, I'm identifying where can I put champions, where can I put SMEs to ensure that the business functions, once we go live, still have this expertise across the business so they don't feel like they don't have any support after everyone else on the project has rolled off. And really, that's how I combine the two principles or approaches to get the best out of this world of change, and therefore helping me get an effective change management outcome, or result. And I'll give you an example. Um, we, there was a scenario that we had where, as I've mentioned, we we needed to agree. We had never had agreement for several years in regards to who owns the cash flow or who's responsible for the cash flows and therefore sign off the cash flows. This might be a surprise to you, but it shouldn't be a surprise if anyone knows if anyone has been involved around or discussed this particular topic between the actuaries and the finance teams, and depending the industry that you're in as well. Um, So we know both teams touched the cash flows. I made adjustments to the cash flows, but the point was who's owning them. So with the new process defined plus the RACI, someone needed to own and be responsible for the cash flows. Um, so the actuaries, everyone would think automatically, yeah, actuaries should own the cash flows. They're the ones who perform the reserving process. Agreed. However, then we had the finance team saying, but we also involved in reviewing the cash flows to ensure that um, some of the adjustments that need to be done or corrected that we, the finance teams, are aware of and the actuaries are not aware of, need to be performed. So we came to a standstill where no one was ready to sign off the overall cash flows because two teams were working on it. To your surprise, actually, we were quite aligned when we came to the results, but it was about who owned that particular step. So what I had to do was one, leverage all the different stakeholders that the process had identified, the checkpoints, the different checks that the two teams performed, and then had to have an honest, intense um, workshop um, with the chief actuaries and the CFOs. I have never set up a workshop with such senior stakeholders and all of them created time to come and have this discussion. It was a discussion that was well overdue. Yes, we had virtual punches, but they were constructive virtual punches. But as we were going through each step, and yes, it was a very painful, very long process. We had a number of workshops, not just one. Um, to go through every single check that we had identified, every single handshake by the different teams. This is after I had done the groundwork with the actuaries and the finance separately and combined it into one to say now this is what everyone's doing. But having and navigating through and having an open discussions from both perspectives, both teams, everyone understood why the other team was performing a particular check and to what level. Because what you do get is the actuaries are looking at something or a result from an actuarial perspective, but then finance are also looking at it from a finance perspective, and that's absolutely fine. However, I needed them to have that conversation so that we knew when who's responsible for performing a particular check, for example, on the inputs. Um, and then, of course, when the results come out, because the results were coming out of a finance system, we had to have a combined check between the finance guys and the actuarial guys, because the actuaries didn't have ownership of the finance system. However, they owned the inputs into the cash flow. In a nutshell, we agreed there is combined ownership, but the actuaries would ultimately do sign off. But we agreed that everyone will perform certain checks. So there was transparency and collaboration actually came to light that we needed to collaborate more and communicate more as we go through the cash flow process. So, what are the outcomes for the change initiative when I combined those two, especially for, using that particular example? Um, One, we decreased the number of processing times. So, because we understood what, for example, the finance team checks were, um, the actuaries started to leverage off some of those checks instead of having to reperform them from the very beginning, which they were not aware of previously. It reduced cost in terms of it reduced the number of resources that were being, costed at for that particular activities. Increased revenue. I would say this is more or less vaguely from a manufacturing perspective. You will increase revenue. If you apply Six Sigma, you will increase revenue because you're satisfying your customers. So that's great. For a service industry, you will decrease your costs because you have less headcount doing that and therefore have more profit at the end of the day. It eliminated waste within the processes and inconsistencies. And in this particular example with their cash flows, it eliminated the duplication of work and effort that was being spent on that, on those some of those checks that we had. We had a long list of over 100 checks. It improved the quality of the service. This is gradual. You're not going to achieve it, especially in the service industry, not manufacturing. But in the service industry, it's gradual because the more people become familiar with the process, it will continuously improve. And we've managed to get that over time because now people have more time to focus on the particular areas that they're interested in and know who to speak to if they want to go beyond what they're actually looking at. Now, PROSCI ADKAR model benefits. This mitigates, it helps you mitigate change resistance because you are working and know who your stakeholders and their needs from the very beginning using the outputs from the SIPOC analysis on the process side. You're working with them to ensure that they are involved and also constructively feeding back and getting them engaged and therefore part of this journey. You're not waiting to the very end to say to them, now here's the end product, start working with it. The other thing you will achieve is a successful implementation of the change because if there's resistance, you're not going to get that change. If you don't understand their requirements and don't deliver to their requirements, you will not get a successful implementation. And we know several senior stakeholders have lost their jobs over this. And yes, include, if anyone is in my position, similar position, you'll be the second one in line to, plus the project manager, to be fired as well at the same time. You get a successful gradual transition to the BAU environment by involving the individuals from the very beginning because you know what their needs are, what they're interested in. You're engaging, you're communicating them, you're getting them to constructively add and be part of the implementation. This is gradual transition and it will really benefit you when you're applying ADKAR because it forces you to keep looking back. It's an agile methodology. You keep looking back and checking, where are we? Where are my stakeholders? And also just the fact that stakeholders, each stakeholder will move through their change journey. I mentioned this in episode 21, using the John Fisher change curve or transition curve. Each one of them will transition through the implementation at their own pace, at their own change curve. So when you do that back and forth on checking where each stakeholder is or stakeholder group is, you have to be agile, but it will make you understand quickly where each one of them are and therefore adapt the strategy to that stakeholder to make sure that you continuously take them on the journey. This will also promote sustainable adoption of the change initiative beyond completion because as a change management practitioner, you hear me say your success is not at the end of the project. Your success is beyond the project, the adoption phase. Have they adopted the change initiative or are they reverting back to their old ways and therefore losing all the Six Sigma, benefits that I've highlighted, which is reducing cost, duplication of work, prolonged processing time. So really, as a change practitioner, you need to think beyond when you define your change management strategy. And when you look at this, all these two combined benefits from Lean Six Sigma and PROSCI, you'll find that it promotes alignment on objectives, consistent messaging, close collaboration, teamwork, common and shared vision from both perspectives, both from a change where the transformation is coming from, but also from the people side, where people are being impacted. You're dealing with their emotional state. If you try and leverage what each team is doing, because the Lean Six Sigma or the process side can also leverage the process findings, especially when there's a change resistance arising. You can feed back and work with the person working on the process to say, this is how we can approach this individual. This is what they're interested in. Because as a change practitioner, I'm more likely to get an honest view and feeling and emotional state from a stakeholder that's impacted than the person working on the process side. Because on the process side, you're bothering them, you're taking time away from them. When they come to me from a change management perspective, they feel I need to know and they need to let me know how they feel, and I have to deal with it by finding a solution to it. So I then have to come up with a strategy. Who do I need to talk to try and understand this problem more, but also come up with the best approach to try and resolve this issue to also help the Lean Six, the process person, plus the end user who's also raising their concerns. And the outcome is you get a fit for purpose change. You get happy end users, because at the end of it, we want them to use it so that the company can realize the benefits and the vision for spending so much money on this implementation and change initiatives. Happy customers. Who doesn't like to be a happy customer? You get a nice product, you're happy. You get a crappy product, you complain and you never go back. And these days we've got social media. You can easily put on Facebook, put your feedback as well on some I've seen on LinkedIn where they haven't been happy with, for example, how an insurance company is processing their claim or handling their claim. So yeah, several ways that now customers have to complain and put you to shame. But when you achieve the three that I've mentioned, you get adoption of the change. That is the vision, what the company has invested in. So realize the benefits of spending all that money. And as a result, this is how I achieve effective change management. And therefore, for me, my ultimate goal is meeting the company objective, customer and end user needs. By the time I finish and the customer and end user is happy, the company's reached its goal, I feel like I've done my job. I can tap myself on the shoulders and I'll say, okay, now time to move on for our next adventure. What's next? And on that note, I'm hoping that has helped you understand why I end up applying both Lean Six Sigma and PROSCI ADKAR model to achieve effective change management. I would encourage it. I know some of the I know very few of us specialize in both, but if you can leverage the findings from both teams, you can both achieve something collectively successfully together. And that's what I'm hoping that I've demonstrated in this episode. And thank you for listening. See you next week. If you find this podcast beneficial or interesting, please press follow, like, or subscribe. Lastly, and of course, don't forget to spread the word by sharing. Thank you for listening.